Everybody. Um, this session is a follow-on from a session that was done from my 9 o'clock alarm from Bob Elling a while ago. He did a session called "The Room with Four Doors," and essentially it's a different way of looking at your calling structure for dancer variation. It's not a change in any shape or form to the fundamentals of calling. It's not a change to the use of modules. It's not a change to any of the other precepts other than how you actually view a square getting in and out. And the basic premise is you can go in one door. Hang on, I just realized I'm not sharing my screen here. Um, Sorry. Are you guys able to see the screen?
Yes.
That is that the presentation up there?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Usually has a red box around it when it's squaring. Okay. So once again, I want to thank Mark and John for acting as my co-hosts. As I was saying, we're going to revisit this concept of the four doors, but we're only going to look at it today in how that it applies to boxes. That way we can see how the technique works and just how powerful the system can be. And what it requires is a change in a caller's perception of how to view the floor. So many of you are site callers, many of you are system callers. There's also quadrant callers, sequence, modules, whatever system you use, this is an effective technique that works for you. But the one big difference is this technique is all about sequence, because sequence has a lot to do with how this technique works. So we're going to actually play with this a little bit and look at just the aspect of using this four-door concept with boxes. And as Bob said, it works with circles, it works with dars, it works with lines, it works with boxes. But boxes is really where you get to see the power of this system. There we go. So the idea is essentially that you can enter any box from a static square using a known get in, and you can exit a box through any door using a known get out. And all you have to know is how to move within the room. So for instance, if we went in from a static square and we got to a corner box, for instance saying head square through, we're in a corner box, we can move back and forth using a chicken plucker technique, or we can move left or right using a module that's going to move left and right. Now, this technique works, it does work from half sachet, but it works best and only works all the time from a standard boy on the left, girl on the right couple. So if your grouping is correct, call to arrange them in normalized couples and move them from box to box, keeping them in sequence. You can do it, as I said, you can do it out of sequence, but that's a more advanced technique. I'll touch on that briefly at the end if there's time. But I really do have to give you that caution. When you're looking at your modules, this is a modular method that keeps them in sequence. So make sure you test all of your modules for the sequence first before you use them. Other modules change sequences and groupings. That changes the direction they're going to move, or it changes it whether or not it's going to move back and forth on the diagonal. And we touched on that briefly during Bob's session, but I want to leave that alone because it's an advanced technique. But the caution I give you is if you're going to use modules, make sure you check your modules for sequence. Run them through the whole thing. So the plan for today is what we're going to look at is we're going to start by looking at a get in for each of the four doors. We'll select a get out for each of the four doors. We'll select a chicken plucker to move across, a left and right rotation, and we'll show you how to use and mix and match these techniques effectively. Now, this is exactly the same as using the modular technique that you already know, such as get into a corner box, use a chicken plucker, come back, call an Alaman left. Get into an opposite box, use a chicken plucker, come back. It's just an expansion on that technique. It's also an expansion on isolated site. Get into a corner box, use some isolated site, get out. Use a chicken plucker, use some isolated site, come back, get out. There's no difference other than the change in orientation sometimes and the change in occupation on the floor. when you're looking at it, all you have to be aware of is the sequences that the boxes go round. So corner, partner, right-hand lady, opposite, and what your module does. So we're going to start with your standard get-ins. Now I've selected a few here. Now this is a very, very busy slide, and this is the simplest part of the technique, is using a chicken plucker. So for instance, if I use a get in to a corner box, and we'll start with a corner box because that's the most familiar. Touch a quarter, boys run, or square through, or anything like that. I can call isolated site, or I can call a module, or I can call a get out. Touch a quarter, boys run, I'm into a corner box, swing through, boys run, Ferris wheel, centers pass through. I've now done a zero module. And then I could call a get out, either Alaman left or, as I've chosen here, slide through, reverse flutter wheel, sweep a quarter, Alaman left. So I've got a get in and a get out. I've got a chicken plucker. I can do a get in, I can do a chicken plucker. I can call my zero module, swing through, boys run, Ferris wheel, centers pass through. I can call pass through, trade by, get me back out, and do my get out. I can get into this box, I can get into this box, I can get into this box, and the technique works exactly the same, going back and forth across the boxes. So the question is, how does it work? And how it works is you choose a get in from any one of the four doors. You choose a zero module or a focus module, or use isolated site. So a zero module is a module that you have that does nothing, basically moves them back to the same spot. A focus module is a zero module that focuses on a specific movement. So if my movement is spin the top, for example, a zero module for spin the top could be swing through, spin the top, slide through. Or I could use isolated site. I just look at where the two people are and I call to get them back on that exact same footprint of my two people snapshot. I know that if I started there and two people are where they started, everybody's back where they're supposed to be. If I want to expand the technique, I do a chicken plucker, and then I repeat that on the other side, and I do a chicken plucker to bring them back. And again, remember that sequence, in and out, they can either be in sequence or out of sequence only. That is very important, and you'll see why in later on. So if you go into a corner box, you're looking at a right-hand lady box. That's what's directly opposite you. The same thing, if you go into a partner box, you're looking at its opposite, which is an opposite lady box. And this is just moving back and forth across the square. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to have a quick look at some of these options. So we're going to start with a corner box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into a corner box, and I'm using heads touch a quarter, boys run as an example. Okay, now from there I can do a zero, I can do anything I want to bring them back to that exact same footprint. A zero module, swing through, spin the top, slide through, brings me back on that footprint. Swing through, boys run, Ferris wheel, centers pass through, brings me back on that footprint. And then I can do a get out. So in and out from that corner box. Slide through, reverse flutter wheel, and sweep a quarter. There's my Alaman left, and of course, where I go next. Now, this works exactly the same for any of the boxes. I can get into a right-hand lady box. And this is a little more complicated. Your get-ins can be as complicated or as simple as you want. Okay, so there's a get into a right-hand lady box. Now, the reason I chose this as a particular get-in is most people would look at here. Oh, I'm in a right-hand lady box. I should have couple number 2 on the outside and 1 and 3 on the inside. No. If I did a pass-through trade by, Remember, it's all about sequence. I'll have my paired couple on the inside, my unpaired couple on the outside. That's the boxes where they're all in sequence. But if you look at it, it's a right-hand lady box. Number 4 man, his right-hand lady is number 1. Number 3 man, his right-hand lady is number 4. Number 1, right-hand lady is number 2. Number 2, right-hand lady is number 3. This is a right-hand lady box in sequence. For the lady callers, you're going to find this a lot easier because your perception, you're looking for the lady and the man is the one that's moving across to you. So if I did a head square through, that number 1 lady would be in this quadrant already. Pass through trade by, she's already staying in that quadrant. So it's in the right quadrant for you. Whereas male callers are used to having the man move across and having the dancers out of sequence. This is all about sequence. They're in sequence. And of course, a get out from a right-hand lady box in sequence, pass through, trade by. Alaman left. And as you can see, we were just a right and left grand away from home. The same principle works to get into a partner box. Okay, lead to the right, veer to the left, ladies trade, wheel and deal. And we're now in partner boxes. Notice everybody's still in sequence. 1, 4, 3, 2. The ladies, 1, 4, 3, 2, or if you prefer going the other way, 1, 2, 3, 4. And they're all looking at their partner. And they're all normal couples. Okay. As I said, it works for groupings, but when you're starting to learn this technique, keep your pairings standard and keep them in sequence. You'll find it's much easier to learn. And a standard get out from a partner box, spin chain through and extend to a right and left grand. Spin chain through, boys are working, extend, right and left grand. And at any time of any of these boxes, you can use that chicken plucker methodology that we talked about to move across to the opposite, and you can mix and match these get-ins and these get-outs. So a simple get into an opposite box, 4 ladies chain 3/4, heads square through, or heads touch a quarter and boys run if you prefer. Okay, and you notice that we're still in sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the ladies. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or the other way, 1, 4, 3, 2. They're all in sequence, and they're all looking at their opposites. And a standard get out, 8 chain 3, 1, 2, Alaman left, and promenade home. And it's a little shorter promenade. So your get-ins and your get-outs you can mix and match pretty much anywhere. And the strength of this is, with the chicken plucker, what you do is you're getting into one box, you can use a chicken plucker, and you can use that get out. So if I wanted to get into an opposite box, I could get into an opposite box using 4 ladies chain 3/4, heads square through. If I used a chicken plucker to move it across to a partner box, I could easily call spin chain through, extend, right and left grand. Knowing what box you get into, what your opposite box is, and what get out has now expanded your choreographic repertoire at least 4 times. You're no longer in head square through, corner box, move across, come back, finish. And then you do the same thing for the sides. Now you can get into whatever box you want, move across, come back, using no change to your technique other than changing your chicken plucker to pass through trade by instead of right and left through pass through trade by, because that changes sequence. And your isolated sight, your 0 modules, everything will all work exactly the same, including your invert and rotate modules, I might add, as long as you keep the sequence. That's the importance and the strength of this. So we'll go back to our presentation here. So what you're going to do is you're going to choose to get into any of those 4 doors. You're going to use a 0 module, isolated site, whatever. Do a chicken plucker. Do another 0 module or an isolated site routine. You can do a get out from that new box, or you can do a chicken plucker and come back and do a get out from there. If you set up these different types of boxes, they have different orientations. They have different occupation points on the square, interacting different dancers with different people. And it's a very quick and effective way to add a lot of positional and personal interaction variety into your choreography without a lot of choreographic modification. If you now know 4 get-ins and 4 get-outs and 1 0, you've got a lot of material that is not going to repeat because dancers are dancing differently. And you should already know your 5 focus modules, your magic module, your conversion partner line to corner box to partner line. That works the same as well. All of these things will work interactively as long as you maintain that sequence. And I can tell you right now, if you never go past this point in choreographic control, you still have a wide variety of choreographic mix and match in your flows. And I really, really want to stress this, and this is one of the things that Bob stressed in his presentation. It's best to master this point of work before progressing to the next component in the 4-door systems, which is the left and right rotation. Okay, and in his presentation, we referred to this as method 2. Just remember that sequence, the sequence, you want to keep your sequence in. Okay, sequence in. The second part is using the side doors, is what I call it. Now, if you're in a room with 4 doors, so we're looking in from the partner box door, we look directly across to the opposite box. If we came in from the corner box, we would look directly across to the right-hand lady box. And we would use a chicken plucker in the middle to go straight across. This technique uses the same idea, but the modules that you're going to look at rotate right, 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 or left, 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 left. I've chosen 2 modules. One module is a right-hand move, so it will move me from a partner box to a right-hand lady box to an opposite box to a corner box and back to the partner box. And the one I've chosen is swing through, girls circulate, boys run, wheel and deal. I've also chosen a module to do left hand. So, and that's split the outside 2, separate around 1 to a line, lines touch a quarter, all 8 circulate, boys run, careful now, trade by. I used that one because you're doing a boys run trade by, it's a forward motion. Some people would do a partner trade and all sorts of things. Don't want to do that. You want to keep them moving forward. It's important that when you start using these transition modules that move either left or right, that you must maintain sequence. And that is a word must. Get to know a few modules that do this and integrate them into your practice. Because if you get into a corner box, instead of going across to the right-hand lady, if you change that to a partner box by going right, swing through, girls circulate, boys run, wheel and deal, I can now use that chicken plucker back and forth and get out from a partner box. And the dancers are going to go, oh wow, that's not where I expected to see my corner. I'm used to moving back and forth. Once you find a few modules that take you right or left, choose one that takes you right, choose one that takes you left. Learn to use them. This is a more advanced technique and it does require focused practice. Okay? You don't want to cloud your judgment with too much information right now. It's like you see some callers prepare for a tip and they'll write out 400 modules using a figure and they can't remember what it is they wanted to do at the end of it. Choose one module, start small, and build on it. Once you have it in your head, this will always work, then you can learn a second one. In doing this, it's also important that when you test these modules, you make sure it goes one direction and one direction only. Okay, so for instance, if we look at our chicken pluckers go across and back. Okay, so I just want you to watch this sequence. Okay, pass through, trade by, left touch a quarter, boys run, slide through, trade by, right and left through, swing through. Boys run, couples circulate, Ferris wheel. Centers pass through, swing through, boys run, couples circulate, wheel and deal. 8 chain 2, do side do to a wave, ladies trade, recycle, trade square through 3, trade by, and so on and so on and so forth. Now this sounds silly, but I did that for a very, very specific reason. So, what did you notice about that whole sequence? Anybody?
It was too quick. I couldn't see it.
I thought I saw those dancers moving sort of right, and then left or something like that.
Okay. If you look at where they moved all over the floor, didn't they?
Yeah.
Okay. They moved right, they moved left, they changed orientation, they were dancing. But if I look at the man, look at what this man is doing and look at what this man is doing. Oh, wait a minute. They're doing exactly the same thing all the time. And the same with the ladies. The ladies have exactly the same flow all the time. The thing to notice there, and I'd like to challenge anybody to give me 3, let's take this off the screen for a second. Give me 3 of the sequences that were in that routine. I'll give you 1. Pass through, trade by. That's a chicken plucker without the right and left through. That moves me directly across. Most people can remember that. But if we look at these, every one of these sequences, there's my square through, there's my first chicken plucker, pass through, trade by. Let's just scroll up here so you can see what's going on. Here's another chicken plucker. I'm now in a right-hand lady box. So I should go back to a corner box. Left touch a quarter, boys run, slide through, trade by, right and left through. I should be in a corner box. Yep, I'm in a corner box. I've just gone back and forth, back and forth. Every one of those sequences is a chicken plucker. I'm now in a right-hand lady box. I'm back in a corner box. I'm just on the other side of the square. Every one of these sequences is a chicken plucker. What it does is it shows you to stress the importance of start small. Start with a pass-through trade by as your chicken plucker to move directly across the square. If you try and learn all of those chicken pluckers all at once, just so that you have a lot of variety, you're going to forget every one of them. But if you learn one, and once you've used it and mastered it, you can add a second one. Learn it, master it, and use the 2. The same principle applies to this left and right rotation. Learn one module that will always move them right. Learn one module that will always move them left around. Okay? And just like once you've found a new module that takes you either right or left, use it. Test it 4 times. Does anybody know why we would test it 4 times?
Going home?
In, out, and half side, is it?
No, 4 times. Use the same module 4 times. It means if I get into a corner box, if I use the module 4 times, I know it's going to take me to the partner box. I use it again, it's going to take me to the right-hand lady box. Then I know it's going to take me to the opposite box and back to the corner box. The reason I say if you're going to make a module, test it 4 times for this technique. Sometimes you'll do a module that will take you over and back. And that's a really, really advanced technique, and we want to stay away from that at the moment. When Bob gave his presentation, he covered a lot of material in here. But right now, all we want to do is cover the basic material going in and out. So for instance, okay, we're going to look at that right-hand lady rotation, swing through, girls circulate, boys run, wheel and deal. That's the module we want to look at. Swing through, girls circulate, boys run, wheel and deal. So we'll get into a corner box. Head square through, and I've slowed it down a little bit for you there, Alan. Okay, so there's my corner box. There's the sequence. Boom. Okay, I am now in, notice remember what I said about you have to change your perception about where the dancers are? If my corner box is oriented this way and I want to change it to a partner box, I'm not looking here. What I'm looking at is the dancers. I'm keeping the orientation on the floor. I'm keeping the occupation on the floor. All I'm doing is moving the dancers, or sorry, I'm not keeping the I'm moving the dancers to a different occupation, but I'm keeping the orientation. Okay, I do the same thing from a partner box, swing through, girls circulate, boys run, wheel and deal. That should take me to a right-hand lady box. Is everybody looking at their right-hand lady? Yes, they are, and they're all in sequence. Yes, they are. I do it again, swing through, girls circulate, boys run, wheel and deal. Okay, I've now gone from a right-hand lady box to an opposite box. Is this an opposite box? Everybody's looking at their opposite? Yes, and they're all still in sequence. And for the ladies, you can see what I mean about it's a lot easier to track that lady and her dancer, because as she moves around the floor, you can see exactly you're following who is with whom. There's actually a position change that makes it easier for you to follow than it makes it easier for the boys, because these boys are staying in exactly the same spot. All I'm doing is moving the girls around. And I got into a corner box and started there. I should end in a corner box. So this module, swing through, girls circulate, boys run, wheel and deal, takes me from one box to another. And when you think about the power of that, if I get into a corner box, instead of using a chicken plucker back and forth, I can call this module get into an opposite box, use a chicken plucker back and forth, or I can call a get out from my opposite box, or sorry, from my partner box, or I can use a chicken plucker and call a get out from my opposite box, or I can call a module from my partner box and a get out. And all I have added is one module, but I'm now setting it up differently, I'm getting out differently, and I've added so much variety by adding one module just by knowing this technique. One simple get in, one simple get out. And of course, the same thing works with left-hand dancer rotation. Now you remember what I said about the rotation? We're not looking at the orientation on the floor because that can change. This is one that changes the orientation, but it's still the same. So I've got my get into a corner box. And I'm just using a corner box because it's an easy reference example. Okay, so as I did the first time, I went corner, partner, right hand opposite. I should go the other way. Corner, opposite, right hand, partner, back to corner. And if I've done this correctly, this should work. So there's my corner box. If I split the outside two, separate around one, make a line, touch a quarter, circulate, boys run, trade by. Oops, let's back that up a bit. There's my trade by. I should now be in an opposite box because I went left, one box, one door.
While you're there, Mel.
Yeah.
I always like to point out to my newer trainees that everybody worries about the opposite setups. And the clue here is if you just look at that, if your key couples are on opposite sides of the square and facing the same direction, they're diagonal across the square. And that gives you the clue that we're in an opposite setup.
Yep.
And not only that, you can
1 and
see
4, 1 and 4.
You can physically see more easily that if I call a pass-through trade by, that they're going to meet.
That's right. And what is our chicken plucker from any of the boxes? Pass through trade by.
Yeah.
Opposite box takes me to a partner box. I
Sorry
can use that.
here.
No, you're absolutely correct. But you notice the one thing that this technique did, instead of it does move from corner to opposite to right-hand lady to partner. But notice the orientation on the floor is changing. For the lady callers, look at number 1 lady. Look at where she is. Now, the change in orientation doesn't matter. You have to trust that your module works. All you're doing is watching where they are on the floor, because you know using this module I have gone from corner box to opposite box. If I do it again, split the outside 2, separate round 1, touch a quarter, circulate, boys run, and trade by. Okay. And again, for the lady callers, all I'm doing is moving her around the floor. That is my right-hand lady. Even though I'm on this side, notice I've changed orientation from up and down to across. My number 1 man still has the same occupation, but I'm just moving the lady across. And for lady callers that are tracking the lady, this is much easier. For men, it's pretty easy because guess what, guys? You're not moving. I do it again. Split the outside 2, separate round 1, touch a quarter, all 8 circulate, boys run and trade by. Oops. I've now moved the lady into the next box. Notice she's moving around, making it easy to tell what box you're in. The men are still in exactly the same spot. Even though they've moved around and changed partners, they're changing orientations, they're not really going anywhere. And you can see that, see? They don't really go anywhere. That's it. And if I do it the 4th time, this should bring me back to my corner box. So this is a left-hand rotation. And what happens with these is these change modules take you through a sequence of doors back home. They're essentially what is called, or what used to be called, a 1/4 zero. That means if you do this 4 times, you zero out. But if you look at any of those 1/4 zeros, every one of those is a rotation module, meaning that you have to go through the module 4 times to get back to you when you start. But it's handy information because you stumble across these things and say, oh, that didn't work. Have a look at where it puts you, and you'll find that a lot of these fractional zeros that you use are quarter zeros that you have dismissed only because you didn't recognize the different types of boxes. And there's a few extra modules that are in the notes that go with this that show you pick one that you like or develop your own that you like that you can remember. Just remember, your path flows right, goes from corner to partner to right-hand lady to opposite. If the path flows left, it goes corner, opposite, right-hand lady, partner, back to corner. Okay. So if we look at, what do we got here? Oops, sorry. So that's what we've essentially discussed. It's a module that continually rotates one direction or the other. And how to use it is exactly the same as doing the chicken plucker, going in from a box, doing a chicken plucker, going out the other side, or going in, coming back, and going out the side you came in. But using a rotation gives you so many more options because you've got a different get in for each box, a different get out for each box, and you you can use the chicken plucker or the rotation, knowing where you're going to go. So knowing where you're going to go is going to give you options of what you're going to do. It does take practice. It takes a lot of effort to change your mentality from what you used to do to adding a different technique. But as with anything in calling, success starts very small, one little bit at a time, and it builds upon itself. And eventually what you have is this whole myriad of choreographic systems in your head that have nothing to do with anything except moving the dancers around the square effectively. And no matter where you are in that square, you can then add a module, or you can then add isolated sight, and you've got so much power. If you're going to do isolated sight and use a focus movement, you've got the power to do it in any one of those boxes with any one of the partner groupings. If you're going to use a module, a focus module, like spin the top, I can do head square through, there's my corner box. Spin the top. Great. Slide through. I've now done my focus module. I can do a chicken plucker, pass through, trade by. I'm in a right hand lady box. Swing through, spin the top. Great, I'm in a right hand lady box. Slide through, I'm still there. I can do my rotation module. Swing through, girls circulate, boys run, wheel and deal. I've moved them right. Oh, wait a minute. From there, I'm in an opposite box. Oh my goodness, what am I going to do from an opposite box? Swing through, spin the top, slide through. I can now do a chicken plucker back to a partner box, pass through, trade by. And I can do a get out from a partner box. Or if I have a get out with a spin the top, swing through, spin the top, slide through. There's my partner box again. I can do what I want, you know. I can do a right and left grand or a pass through right and left grand if I want, you know. Whatever I want to do as a get out, I can do as a get out for that right hand box. And I haven't repeated anything other than the choreographic sequence in the caller's head. I haven't repeated anything for the dancers because I dance with different people. I've danced facing different directions. I've danced in different organizational groupings, and I'm not getting out exactly the same every time. And all I've done there is add one module, swing through, spin the top, slide through. And yet I've moved to all four quadrants of that square. Okay. I cannot stress this enough. When you look at the learning process, you start small and you build big. Okay? Start with a get-in module for the 4 doors. Learn one sequence, that chicken plucker. I strongly suggest starting with pass through and trade by. Use that as your chicken plucker to move back and forth across. Okay? If you do this, you're going to learn 4 simple routines right there. A get in, a get across, and a get out. That 4 becomes 8 routines if you're going to use the chicken plucker to come back again. That's 12 routines right there. If you decide to add a focus module, you've got 16 new routines. If you decide to have a focus module on one side and do isolated sight on the other side, you've now got 24 new routines. Or sorry, 32 new routines, because you've added another 8 routines onto that. Each isolated sight module that you use, or each isolated sight technique you use, makes each routine uniquely different. So you can use different isolated sights and you've got a whole bunch of new routines. You're increasing it exponentially. If you use a module on one side and isolate it on the other, you've now added 48 more routines. That gives you 80. Now, if you know a left rotation and one right rotation for each, that's 96 more. That's 272 modular sequences that I can do using swing through, spin the top, and a right or left rotation. Still using swing through, spin the top, adding one isolated sight for each box. What it does, it gives you absolute control of the dancer's direction, the dancer's flow, the dancer's interaction with other dancers. It allows you to control and be aware of the floor orientation because although it's going to change, you know what type of box you're going into. It also allows you to control the occupation of the square, so that, for instance, if you want to get them out on the right hand side, or you want to get them out on the opposite side for a right and left grand to home, you can easily move from across the side, from the corner box, from the opposite box, or do a zero from the a partner box, or do a zero from the opposite box, and you're in the position to call an Alaman left, right, and left grand get out and get the dancers at home. You have complete control of the dancers by watching where they are. And you're not changing your choreography. You're not having to learn anything new.
Can I just chime in there, Mel?
Absolutely.
The magic module. I think what you really need to highlight, and I think you have, but it probably slipped by, is that knowing which way the circulates are working is going to tell you which way your module rotates, and you can probably reduce the number of modules you use by saying, okay, if I'm in the corner box and I start a magic module, which is swing through, but you just call the boys trade. So you now got the wave back in sequence. You know that if you circulate the boys one way, the square will rotate the counterclockwise. If you have the girls rotate, it goes the other way. So straight away, the one module is giving you either the right hand, the clockwise rotation, or the left hand counterclockwise rotation.
Yep,
So
absolutely correct.
So that module you were using with, what was it? Swing through, girls circulate,
boys run, wheel and deal.
Yeah, if you were to change that, so you put a boys trade in there, or it'd probably still work even without the boys trade. You will find you can rotate the module the other way.
Yep, I didn't want to do, because I talked about left and right rotation. That is actually one of the right hand rotation modules. But I didn't want to confuse that with the magic module. And what Alan is saying is absolutely correct. If you look at your magic module and you take the bend the line off it, change it to a wheel and deal, you can add the girls circulate, leave out the boys trade, or you can leave out the girls circulate and keep the boys trade. It'll work either way. What I didn't want to do is confuse it, because that just adds more and more and more and more modules to the technique. Most of the things that you will already know are still going to work. And we talked about that briefly. You've got your foundation modules, which are your zero, swing through, boys run, Ferris wheel, centers pass through. There's your zero box to zero box, or your box zero module. You've got your magic module, swing through, girls circulate, boys trade, boys run, bend the line, which is your conversion from a box, a zero box to a zero line, or a corner box to a partner line, if you will. You've got your touch a quarter, circulate, boys run, which is kind of what we're doing here in one of those that with the separate. That's your partner line to corner box. And then you've got your invert and rotate from the box, slide through, pass through, bend the line, slide through. All of those modules work within this technique. When you are very, very experienced with seeing what these things do, you can do exactly what Alan's saying, and that's, okay, instead of doing both the girls circulate and boys trade, do one of them, and instead of bending the line, wheel and deal, and you've got another module which is going to rotate these sequences. When you're advanced enough to be aware of that, you can see the sequence flow. Girls go one way, boys go the other way. That allows you to control the choreographic flow even more. And I didn't want to get into that because I didn't want to change sequences with that, because what Alan was saying was swing through, boys trade. Okay, swing through is a sequence changer. Boys trade changes it back. Now I've got a whole different idea. I don't have to do a girls circulate because I've changed the rotation direction. That, when you start using this technique, starting slow and building up, you're going to see a lot of those. But as Alan's very rightly suggested, if you use what you know and start there, you're going to find it's going to build in your mind a lot easier. Learn this technique, learn a couple of modules that do this, and then go with the modules you know and start playing with them, such as he said, the magic module. When you learn from that module, because you already know it, it's going to be easier to adapt it to what we're doing in this technique sequence. Okay, so as I was saying with this, you're doing so much with so little. 4 get-ins to one of each of the boxes, 1 chicken plucker, pass through, trade by, 1 module, swing through, spin the top, slide through, 4 get-outs, 1 from each of the boxes, 1 left rotation, 1 right rotation, an isolated sight routine, just 2 couple calling. This is, you can make as many routines and as many sequences as you want. And it's really the only way to work with these 4 types of boxes using this technique. I can guarantee you, you will be out of patter music unless you're one of those callers that does, 25, 30 minutes of patter before you do your singing call, which you should never be doing. You're going to run out of patter music long before you run out of potential sequence variety. Okay? For a new caller, this is great news because you're teaching and you're calling using focus modules. You can program routines with a lot of occupation, orientation, personality variety using very, very few prepared modules. So you cut down the amount of modules you need to prepare for your tip to 1, maybe 2, because you already got all this variety available to you. That way you can really focus on how to use the movements you want to present. As Alan rightly said, with experience and practice, your repertoire is going to grow and your choreographic variety will suddenly seem endless, even with only using 2 focus modules to work for an entire evening. Even with 1 module with those above routines and 1 focus module per tip, you're going to run out of music and your music's going to die long before your choreographic variety dies. Okay. Now I wanted to touch briefly on this. Lead to the right and lead to the left boxes. Okay? And we would be absolutely remiss if we left those out of the technique. The principle of your box get-in, the principle of the chicken plucker, and the principle of the get-out remain exactly the same. The reason we don't consider these in the 4-door system is because lead to the right immediately takes you to a sequence change. If I do heads lead to the right, my boys are out of sequence, but my girls are still in sequence. Now, the principle with working with the 4 doors is all about sequence and all about maintaining the dancers in sequence for a routine. Changing the sequence adds a dimension that is far more advanced, and it's for callers that are experienced and more advanced. It's outside the scope, but I want to show you a little bit about this for the inclusion of variety. Okay, so if you remember this routine, swing through, girls circulate, boys run, wheel and deal. Okay, if I'm doing this from a lead to the right box, that should rotate me right 1 sequence. It should take me to a right hand, or sorry, to a corner. Sorry, it should take me to an opposite, I should say. But it doesn't. Okay, let's, where are we? Where's my lead to the right? There we are. Okay, so if we look at this, lead to the right, okay, there's my lead to the right box, and you notice that the boys are out of sequence, but the girls are still in sequence. This is a partner box grouping. Okay, it's not a partner box per se, it's a grouping. It's also an opposite box grouping. And that's the big difference. You have to work with the phrase grouping. And that is a very, very advanced technique in calling. Okay, knowing what group is, regardless of where the dancers are within that group. Okay, but if I use that same module, swing through, circulate, I should rotate right. Okay. Where's my wheel and deal? Okay. Sorry, that would be my chicken plucker grouping, I should say. It should be a right across, but it's not. What it's doing, it's taking me to a right-hand lady grouping. This is a right-hand lady box grouping, not a right-hand lady box. Because remember, all of these things are a phasar. So this is where you have to add that 1 OS to, you know, all those other kinds of things into the definition, and it gets way too complicated. If I do it again, swing through, girls circulate, these are okay, this is what would normally be a chicken plucker type rotation. I can do a chicken plucker to take it to these opposite, these aren't opposite groupings that it'll take me to. It'll rotate around. This is my opposite box grouping. Notice it's still opposite, but they're not facing their opposites. It's the grouping that's important. And why I say this is an advanced technique is because you have to recognize groupings rather than your normal standard box position. This is quite a bit more difficult for the ladies and quite a bit more difficult for the male callers. And if I repeat it again, like I said, it's a 4/0, 4 times, I get back to my lead to the right box. You have to be really, really, really careful on those. Now, I'm not saying don't use lead to the right or lead to the left. What I'm saying is if you're going to use a lead to the right or a lead to the left box in your choreography, stick with the chicken pluckers, stick with lead right box get-outs or lead left box get-outs or conversions to partner lines and use get-outs from that. It's still a lot of choreography, but try and keep that away from this group because it's just too much to remember at this time. This is all about sequence, and that's what you want to focus on, is the fact that it is all about sequence.
I beg to differ, Mel, because if you take your lead right box and put it in sequence, everything that you've been saying today works. As you say, you must be working in sequence.
Absolutely.
So if you have a lead right box with a flutter wheel, so that now you have a true partner box, then everything you've done today will work just by adding that one chord. But what you're doing is changing the arrangement of the group so that you have an in-sequence group rather than an out-of-sequence group.
Yeah. I'll show this to you. So, we've got a heads lead right. There is my lead right grouping.
Partner group.
Or sorry, my partner grouping. What I have to do is I have to change that to a partner box in sequence.
Flutter wheel.
Okay. Now what I've done, now everything. Sorry?
The beauty of that is not only do you have the option of working in boxes, but you have the option of working in lines as well.
I realize that. Now, the reason I said it's best to leave this alone, notice that the addition of the flutter wheel has changed this to a partner box. Everybody's facing their partner. They're in standard position. They're in sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I do a lead to the left box,
you just put it back in sequence again.
Okay. Now I have the girls out of sequence and the boys in sequence.
Reverse flutter wheel.
I now have a partner box back in sequence. The reason I say
to my mind,
no, just hang on a second, Mel.
Yeah, but I'm just finishing my point, Mel. To my mind, that is simpler for the new caller to understand than and now applying everything you've done today, super. Because now if you add
absolutely
your swing through,
what I was saying was the technique is designed for standard in sequence boxes. When they're out of sequence, I'm going to talk about the importance of sequence in a second. What Alan is saying is absolutely correct. By adding a movement like a flutter wheel to a lead to the right or a lead to the left box, you're putting him into the partner box or the partner box on either side. And all of those techniques for into the 4 doors work. It is a very simple thing, except that you have to recognize on the lead to the right, I have girls in, boys out of sequence. On a lead to the left, I've got boys in, girls out of sequence. And I have to make that change to get to a partner box. That doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're starting out as a new caller, you're adding on a lot of techniques at this point. It is something that's small. It's something that, what I'm saying is, leave that until you're comfortable working with the boxes, and then you add this on to it. In the meantime, just keep your lead to the right boxes where they were, because what's happening is you're changing groupings if you're going to use the techniques. And if you add a movement like flutter wheel, you're using the techniques. Yes, it makes it simple, but you have to remember, I have to use a flutter wheel. Now, you also, if you're calling and you get into this situation, you have to recognize I'm in a lead to the right box. I'm not going to recognize that on the fly if I'm calling, because I'm never going to get into it using this technique. I have to call a lead to the right box. Lead to the right and flutter wheel does not flow. Lead to the left, reverse flutter wheel, does not flow.
I
Doesn't
beg to
flow
differ.
well.
I beg to differ.
Well, I don't really think it does.
And the flutter wheel from any facing couple is going to be comfortable.
No, I don't personally find
What we're
moving,
debating,
but
here,
that's a difference of opinion.
what
We
we're
can have that
debating,
later.
what we're debating here, Mel, is whether we stick with the old idea of these things of lead right boxes and all that, or you add in the new concepts and say, look, the steps are you go from a static square to a group. When you're in the group, you put the group in sequence, and then you do all your choreography
and
that you want.
and you are absolutely correct. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with what you're saying. What I'm saying is that is a more advanced technique for callers that can see this and see these groupings on the fly, or they set them up intentionally, but I'm adding another dimension. I'm adding the dimension of sequence. And you'll see why I'm not adding the dimension of sequence right away in the next slide. What you're saying is absolutely correct. I'm not arguing that.
But I would have thought that a person can recognise their partner much quicker than anything else on the floor. And so I would have thought going to a partner box, looking at your partner would be the first thing that most callers would want to be able to master. And any new caller should be able to master that, particularly when it's only one call or two calls to put his box in normal arrangement and then put his partner facing him facing his partner in sequence.
Yep.
That should be the fundamental process.
As I said, Alan, I'm not arguing that, but recognizing sequence is one of the hardest things for callers to master. It takes time to learn that, to see what the sequence is, and not everybody recognizes them like that. I don't. I had to work really, really hard to recognize sequence.
How do you recognize you're in sequence when you do the square through then?
When I do a head square through, I know
But
I'm
this
in
whole
sequence.
system, the whole system you've given us today, revolves around being in sequence.
That's
So
correct.
you're assuming that calling a bit of choreography, which happens to be
Okay.
your square through.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to finish this, and then we're going to come back, because this discussion is very, very important, and I'm
Surely
not
is.
dismissing it. You are absolutely correct. I'm not arguing that. What I'm dealing with is the technique and the importance of sequence. Why I wasn't changing sequence is because sequence, when you start changing sequence, you get into a habit of changing sequence, and unless you have the experience as a caller to recognize that, it makes a big difference using these techniques. And you'll see why here. But what you're saying is absolutely correct, especially with lead to the right and lead to the left boxes. Okay. When we talk about the importance of sequence, sequence has a big impact on this technique. And the knowledge that you must keep the boxes in sequence is very important. And the technique is designed to keep them in sequence all the time. When you change sequence, such as a lead to the right, or adding a right and left through, or a pass through, bend the line, it has a very, very big effect on what these boxes do. If you understand it, it's great. It adds a whole new dimension to choreography. But until you understand it and you're experienced and you're flexible with it, be aware that it's going to change the whole dynamic of where these dancers are moving. It's going to change the direction of a right rotation to a left rotation, and so on. If you start in sequence, your box rotates to the next type of box, either across the street in a chicken plucker, or it goes right or left, depending on what module you're using. But if you start out of sequence, and that's the couples out of sequence, you add it, or if you add a sequence changer somewhere in there, such as pass through, bend the line, or a right and left through, the boxes will rotate to the next box grouping with the dancers out of sequence. Now that's important for choosing the correct get out. If you remember our chicken plucker, we've changed the chicken plucker in this technique just to a simple pass through trade by. That's a right hand lady box. The standard chicken plucker is right and left through, pass through, trade by. That's a right hand box out of sequence. So if I do that knowingly, I have to make sure that I change my get out, or as Alan was saying with lead right boxes, I have to do something to put them back into sequence to make this technique work. And that's just more things to remember at this time. This is really good knowledge to have if you want to work with out of sequence formations and transitions, such as the standard chicken plucker, but it has an impact on the direction as well when you want to rotate boxes. So if you wanted to use the standard chicken plucker and then use a right hand box rotation that normally works in sequence, it's going to rotate them to the left. Again, this is more stuff that you have to remember. It helps you when you know where you are and where you're going to end up for what get out you want to use. However, as I'm trying to stress, this is an advanced technique. It's part of what Bob was describing in his presentation in Method 3. I personally would not worry about this until you're really comfortable working across the street or going left and right only. Okay. Once you're comfortable doing that and you have a module or two that does all of these things while they're in sequence, then you start working with the out of sequence stuffs. All of the other techniques work out of sequence, except that it causes a direction change. So when we look at that, the importance of sequence, which is, okay, sorry, whatever. If I look at this with sequence, okay, if my get in is head square through, there's my corner box in sequence. If I use the standard chicken plucker, which is right and left through, pass through, trade by, or right and left through, dive through, pass through, that takes me to a right hand box out of sequence. Now, as Alan was saying with the lead to the right box, I can fix the sequence here, but you have to be aware of sequence and know that. If I do my right hand rotation module, swing through, girls circulate, boys run, wheel and deal, I should get to, from a corner box, I should go to a partner box. But my sequence is out. It's taking me out of sequence. If I do another one with a different one, this is my left hand. Oh, it's all there. Instead of going my left, I'm going right. And I'm out of sequence. And I should be back in my right hand lady box. Yes, I am. So there's a number of ways to commonly see this. If you have these corner boxes or right hand lady boxes, if your paired couple is on the inside, you're in sequence. If your paired couple is on the outside, you're out of sequence. That's in a right hand lady box. On a corner box, if your paired couple is on the outside, you're in sequence. Your paired couple is on the, your unpaired is on the inside, you're in sequence. That's the corner box. It is a lot to remember. When you're calling these techniques, keeping them simple at the first is the easiest way. If you're aware of sequence, you can add sequence changers into your routine. So if I do head square through, there's my corner box. This is my original I'm going to rotate left. Boys run, trade by. And I've gone from a corner box to an opposite box in sequence. I'm going to add a sequence changer, right and left through. Okay. I'm now in an opposite box out of sequence. If I do the same module again, whereas I rotated left before from my corner box, as you can see, I've rotated back into a corner box, but it's out of sequence. So I've rotated left, I put them out of sequence, I've now rotated right using that same module. Again, this is an advanced technique. And the same with what Alan is saying, it's an advanced technique on a lead to the right to do a flutter wheel to put them back into sequence. If you're aware of it, of the sequence, and if you're aware of lead to the right, lead to the left, which are two very familiar boxes for the dancers, if you know a sequence changer to put them back into sequence, you can use the rest of the techniques. And as he said, it's a very, very easy thing. It's a very common thing to do. We just have a difference of opinion on when to actually learn that. I can't say I'm right. I can't say Alan's right. That's the way I'm familiar with it. His way is more familiar. And whichever way works for you is going to be the best way for you. So this is a corner box out of sequence. I can add a different sequence changer here. Pass through, bend the line. Okay, then I do my conversion, touch a quarter, circulate. Sorry, not my conversion. I finish the rotation, pass through, and trade by. Because I added that sequence changer, I've now gone the other direction again. I'm now back in my partner box.
Opposite lady. Opposite lady box.
Sorry, my opposite lady box. Thank you. So I went from a static square, head square through to a corner box. I've done a standard rotation to an opposite lady box. That's a left-hand flow. I added a sequence changer, right and left through, and I repeated that left-hand flow rotation, but instead of going left, it now took me right because I'm out of sequence. And this is what Alan was saying on these techniques with the magic module. If you do swing through, if you do a girl circulate or a boy circulate, the boys circulate changes the sequence, it changes the direction. It's the same thing. That's advanced knowledge. That's really understanding what choreography does. You don't have to get to that point yet, but that's what it essentially does. By changing the sequence, I also change the direction. The technique isn't changing. All you have to do is be aware of, I changed the sequence. It's an important thing to remember, but it is a more advanced technique. And then, whoops, sorry. If I do that again, so here's my first corner box. My original rotation should take me to an opposite lady box, which it does right there. I do it a right and left through. That's a sequence changer. By repeating that left-hand rotation, because I'm out of sequence, it's now going to rotate me right. And it takes me back to that corner box out of sequence. If I add another sequence changer, and this time I'm adding the sequence changer in the middle of the routine when I'm in lines, pass through, bend the line is a sequence changer. Okay. So there's my separated round one. There's my sequence changer, pass through, bend the line. I'm now going to finish my rotation sequence. Touch a quarter, circulate, boys run, trade by. Again, instead of going left, it's taken me right. And now I'm back to an opposite lady box out of sequence. Or, yeah, in sequence, I should say. Because I've changed the sequence here. I took it out, and then I put it back in. And right here, from an opposite lady box, you can do your opposite lady box get out. It's quite simple if you understand what it's doing. But, again, like any technique, this is requiring a change of your mindset to work sequence. So we're going to stop share. from my point of view, and Alan, what you're saying is absolutely correct. I have no argument with that at all. From my point of view, when you start to learn a technique, what we're asking in if you're going to learn this as a technique, this would be like me saying to you, I want you to learn crams, or I want you to learn quadrant calling. I want you to learn advanced site calling techniques as a technique. I want you to learn modular technique only. If you have a technique that you use, and we're trying to teach you another way of looking at the square, it's best to start small, understand the basis of the technique, and then use your knowledge to advance that technique. If you're an experienced caller, Alan, I'm not sure what system you used to start calling. I'm just going to say, let's say you were a crams quadrant caller fully at first. You understand site calling, you understand the dancer movement. If I'm saying set that aside, set all of that aside and learn this technique, I would say change your perception until you have the basics down, which would take him probably 5 minutes. And then you can add what you know, such as the flutter wheel to the lead to the right. Now, when you do this, you can do the same thing. Like, for instance, if I do a heads flutter wheel and then lead to the left, I've now fixed that problem. That's advanced calling techniques. That's being so aware of where the dancers are on the floor that you can see that sequence. What Alan is saying is absolutely correct. One of the very first things that you see as a caller is that match of partners. Who is the partner in the technique? And if you have partners, it's very easy to see what your sequence is. It just, in your box, it goes 1-2 or 1-4. It's no more difficult than that. If you're aware of it, you can fix it immediately. And then all of this technique works. If you're not aware of all of that, stick to the basics of the technique until you are aware. And then you're going to find that easier. That's the way. That's my approach. There's nothing wrong with Alan's approach either. Same as mine. What works for you is what works for you. If you understand what Alan is saying, that gives you another whole dynamic dimension to your calling, getting in to use these techniques by adding 2 complete boxes. And now what you've done is you've gone 272 times 2, whatever that works out to. So that's 544 sequences just by knowing that adding a flutter wheel to lead right or lead left. I've now changed from 272 to 544 different box combinations that work in this system. That's a lot of material. So let's open it up for discussion. For those of you that couldn't stay, thank you for coming in. It is going to be on the web. Mark is going to be posting up the recording as well as a copy of the slides and the choreography that's included in the slides. Let's open the floor, and Alan, I'm going to give you first crack at it because I think what you mentioned is an extremely important aspect of this technique.
Yeah, I apologise if I've disrupted your process of what you're putting. What you're putting is fine. I think the modern technique now is when you start in a square, you have a partner square. When you lead right, you've generated a partner group.
Yeah.
And then you adjust that partner group to get a partner box or a partner line. And so that's just a different step process to achieve what you're doing and saying, oh, I've learnt that square through gives me a corner box. Where you don't have a technique then for all the other boxes. What I'm saying is if you go put the group stage in first, then the box stage and the line stage next, you have a much more linear learning process.
Yeah.
And so if I chain the ladies across the square, I have an opposite lady square. Everybody in the square, before they even move, all have the opposite lady as a partner. All are in sequence. So we have a perfect setup. So if we lead to the right and then circle the half or circle 3/4 or whatever, you can set up the partner line, or sorry, the opposite lady line or the opposite lady box. And so it's a very simple process. When you do, you adjust to other boxes by doing ladies chain first. And
Absolutely.
that's literally what you're doing. Sometimes you combine the ladies chain with the star through
Yeah.
to give the
I,
other
I,
ladies
I
to
want
give
I
the
want
other
to
ladies chain.
I want to step back a second. This particular session is a follow-on dealing with the boxes, those 4 boxes and the 4 doors of that session that was done by Bob, in which we talked about that, the importance of sequence and the facing direction that doesn't matter. We also talked about working the circle, partner, right-hand lady, working the Alamo ring, partner, right-hand lady, and how that sequence works, working the DARs, and then the setups where we're moving from one box to just the ladies chain. You can set up any one of your boxes with ladies chain combinations and working the lines, getting into these lines, working it from 2-face lines. It was a lot of what you're saying is part of that technique. We left the lead to the right part out of that, and you're absolutely correct, because that technique of chaining the ladies or fixing that sequence was only done at the development, and it was only given lip service. The lead to the right boxes, that was a whole new session. The same as working lines is a separate session of this. That's just the slides from Bob's where we actually talked about those techniques, how to set those up, and the different things,
Yeah, I
including
apologize. I apologize, Mel. I
no,
didn't.
don't apologize,
I
because
didn't.
you're
I
absolutely
didn't.
correct. It's an important dynamic of lead to the right and lead to the left boxes
I
that
just
I
think
left out of this presentation.
I just think we need to, for the newer callers coming along, if understanding groups and then the boxes and lines is a much better process for future callers rather than going back to the old idea of lead right boxes and cross the street boxes and all that. Uh, all of that you can still have if you add the group sequence in first. In other words, you're heading for a group. I want a corner group, and so you set up a corner grouping, and then you arrange the corner grouping to be in sequence. And now you can either have a box or a line. And then you can do all your modular choreography you want to. You can rotate and do all that.
Mm-hmm.
And all I've done is change the front end of the approach.
Yep.
And that's all. That's all I'm suggesting. I'm not in. I'm not
I
saying.
like I said, I am not in any contest with that at all. There are at least 7 different systems of calling.
I think
Sight
that's a
calling,
mistake to start
modular.
calling it a system. It's a
Yeah.
logical learning process, not a.
Well, it is a logical learning process. All of these are logical learning processes. Some of them have more advanced concepts at the beginning. Some of them have more advanced concepts at the end. For many
So
callers,
one of the
they find it very difficult to recognize sequence with groupings. I personally found that one of the most difficult aspects of calling for me, to start recognizing systems and box groupings or line groupings, because the reason for it, I learned differently when I started. There's a lot of unlearning, and right now we have so many different people teaching different aspects of learning to call in different techniques. Some people want cram, some people want quadrant, they want an aspect, they want mental image. I like to present all of the techniques. This is one system, and that's just working the boxes right, left, and across. It is an expansion system, and as I said, it's broken down into 3 different aspects. That's keeping the sequence, the chicken plucker. Aspect 2 is the right and left hand rotation. Aspect 3 is what happens to sequence. Lead to the right and lead to the left boxes are an exception to that, and this is where you're absolutely correct. If you understand they do a sequence change, 1 in, 1 out, you can make that change quickly, and then the whole technique applies. I think you're right. It would have been easier to learn if I understood groupings, but now setting up to an opposite grouping or setting up to a corner grouping or a right-hand lady grouping, regardless of where they are on the floor, regardless of their orientation, that box, I find that difficult. A lot of other callers find it difficult. But if that's what you learn to start, or that's how you understand it, you're probably going to find it easier. And this progression would be, I think, a lot simpler.
But what you were saying is true, that if you work in boxes, then the pass-through trade buy gives you the opposite. And so if you want that opposite group, you go to a partner group and then do a pass-through trade buy.
Yeah.
And then you have that other group. And now you put that group in sequence if you want to, or go back to your partner group if that's easier to put it in sequence. But yeah, so I just feel that we need to progress education of new callers along a little bit so that we keep up with what people have discovered along the way and what we've all learned along our 40 or so years of calling, that we started out just understanding that square through took us to a box, and we worked with that. And as you say, it led to a certain sort of choreography that stuck us in one part of the square and didn't move us around. One further comment I'd make is that when they write modules, they should understand whether it has a geographic relocation or a relationship rotation.
Absolutely. So that comes later with experience.
That comes with experience. But if you put that relationship rotation in first, in other words, if I have a partner box and I step to a partner wave and I have the boys circulate, it goes one way. If I have the girls circulate, it goes the other way. So immediately I can go backwards and forwards between groups in sequence and know where I am. And so I find I can't understand why we aren't teaching the newer guys to work more like that. It just makes it so much more logical.
I think part of that reason is, is everybody clear with what Alan's saying before I progress? Okay, so I think part of that reason is if I do a swing through, girls circulate. Okay, a swing through is a sequence changer for the boys. It takes.
No, forget about that.
No, hear me out. Hear me out. This is an important distinction. So if I do swing through, girls circulate, boys run, I have not changed a sequence. Or sorry, I've changed the sequence one. If I do the boys trade, I put them back in sequence. So the boys are in sequence. Now, if I just do a boys circulate or a girls circulate, I have not changed the sequence at all. If I do a swing through, I've changed the sequence. All this techniques work. I have to remember to change it back, or if I finish it, say boys run, wheel and deal, I've now got my grouping, but my grouping's out of sequence. And if I'm going to use this technique of the 4 doors and work groupings, I also have to remember that if I'm going to do a left-hand rotation module, it's now become a right-hand rotation module. If I'm going to do across the street, it is a straight across the street. A pass-through trade by or a right and left through pass-through trade by is going to change it. But if I do a right and left through pass-through trade by, I've gone from out of sequence to in sequence. Or vice versa. If I just do pass-through trade by, I'm going to stay out of sequence. I'm adding more dimensions on. If you are familiar with calling and you started off familiar with being sequence, what sequence does, this technique works. All you have to do is recognize that I'm out of sequence, I'm going to go left. If I'm in sequence, I'm going to go right. If you're not familiar with that and you keep sequence, left is always left, right is always right. That's why I called what Alan's saying, and he is absolutely 100% correct. What I'm saying is that is a more advanced technique. It will work exceptionally well if that's the way that you were taught to call to start. But I don't think a lot of callers right now are being taught that way to start.
I think you're missing the point, Mel. Really do. You're introducing the idea that swing through is changing sequence, but that's in the middle of some of your modules anyway. And so if I lead right and then turn that right-hand group into a right-hand box, I can now do a pass-through trade by and I'm across the street box.
Mm-hmm.
in sequence because I've put the sequence correct to start with. And so now I'm using your technique that you presented today of
Yep.
going from door to door, right? And so, but if I suddenly decide I want to work to lines, it's only a slide through away from my partner box.
Yep.
So I do a slide through, and I've now got line options of doing line modules, bringing them back to the same group, changing it back to a partner box if I want to, stepping to a wave and knowing that if I circulate the boys, it'll go one way. If I circulate the girls, it goes the other way. I've got
Mhm.
the arrangement I want. I would have thought that is a much more logical teaching process for a new caller than learning all the variations of across the street and square throughs and the whole lot. All of that's irrelevant once you start working with the group first and then the box, then the line if you need it. And you
I'm
should,
not in. I am
as
not
a,
in disagreement with you at all.
as a new caller in any group of four, he should be able to switch from the in sequence box to the in sequence line. And because if he's working in the partner groups, that's so easy to see that he's got his partners together.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question. How many new callers or consider themselves new callers do we have here? Roz, Key. Okay. Roz, now I know you understand what Ellen's talking about. Which technique were you taught beforehand? How did you learn to call?
Well, it's more at the moment. I'm not worrying about sequence at the moment until I go to resolve. But in what he's saying, I can understand what he's saying because if I get in a corner box and I go to do the invert and rotate module, if I'm in sequence, I'll end up in sequence and I'm an element left away. If I do a right and left through and then do my invert and rotate, I've got to remember I'm out of sequence and do some sort of right and left through or something to put them back in sequence before I resolve. And if you forget that, you can um, make things up. It's something else you've got to remember. So I'm just relating it a bit to that way. But if you've got new learners, if for what Alan's saying, you're keeping all the partners together, which probably makes it better for new learners in what you're doing too. So it's an interesting concept.
Very, very political answer, Roz.
Is it?
You are correct. The thing that I noticed there is if I do a right and left through and put them out of sequence and then do my invert and rotate, I have to remember to put them in sequence. So what you're saying is I have to be aware of that sequence.
Yes.
One of the strengths of what Alan is saying is if I set up a corner box, head square through, and I'm just using corner box, it could be a right hand box or an opposite box or anything like that. If I do a slide through and a right, or if I do a slide through, I'm still in a corner box grouping. If I do a right and left through, I'm still in a corner box grouping. If I do another slide through, I'm still in a corner box grouping. I'm back to my original corner box. The only one that's changed sequence in there is the right and left through. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if I look at that, what has actually happened with the dancers on the floor? I put them one way, I put them back the other way. By doing that and being aware of that, that makes these techniques of moving across the street and back very, very simple. And it works very, very effectively for across the street, any of the across the street modules. It works very, very effectively for any of the chicken pluckers, whether or not you want to use right and left through pass through trade by or just pass through trade by, because you're going to be aware of sequence. You're only dealing with the grouping. So if I set up a partner grouping and I call slide through, right and left through, slide through, I'm still in a partner grouping. I haven't really done anything. If I call, I don't know, flutter wheel, I'm still in a partner grouping. I can still use all these same techniques, put them in a box, and maintain that partner grouping to opposite grouping using that same technique as a chicken plucker. It is a simpler concept, but for me, and apparently for you as well, you didn't start by learning how to keep the dancers in sequence or learning the groupings. That's a technique that came along quite a bit after, just like Alan says. In the development, we started off with head square through. This is well after that development actually. Head, square through, and then we started giving names. And then we did head, square through, zero box to cross the street box back to zero box, and we started giving them names. Then we had lead to the right and lead to the left box, and they only worked with a chicken plucker or those two boxes. Then we added the dimension of lines, and we added corner line or partner line. That was pretty much it. That's all we worked from. In the dimension of development, starting off by getting into a partner box or an opposite box or a right-hand lady box was almost unheard of. That came later. Then it was this technique. What came after that was, well, a right-hand lady box is a grouping of these four dancers. And whether or not they're in a line, a star, a diamond, whatever formation, as long as I'm looking at those four dancers, I'm in that line, or that grouping. And if I understand that grouping, I can have that grouping going this way, or I can have that same grouping going in a group of four dancers. I can look at it in lines or boxes. If you start learning that way, that is a phenomenal power that you have, because all of this techniques apply, and all you have to know is in sequence or out of sequence. That moves me right, that moves me left, or moves me across. The chicken plucker will always move me across. And I can always fix my grouping because I recognize the sequence. Most of us did not learn that way, so we have to relearn. And that's why I say you have to step back from what you know, look at the technique, start small, and then take what you know and add it to the technique. Alan, I'm in complete agreement with what you're saying. But this is not, just hang on a second, this is not my technique. This is a technique that was introduced. This is Bob Elling's presentation. I was asked to look at managing the boxes part of this as a technique specifically, which is why this presentation is here. For a new caller, if you understand groupings and sequence and quadrants, wow, this will work for you like a dream.
Just one more comment, that when they're writing their modules, it's nice to put some sort of hieroglyphic on the top of your module so you know whether this module is a rotate clockwise or a rotate anti-clockwise, because that way you know which way it's going to move you before you start calling the module. You see it at the top of your module, just like you put zero partner box at the top of your module so you know I'm working from a partner box. So you could have RR, for instance, so for relationship rotation, so you can say clockwise, CW, so you know which way it's going.
Yep.
And that also, then if you put near left quadrant to right quadrant, or as well, you understand quadrants at the same time, so it adds to the learning process, but you're developing as you go.
Absolutely. This is a good example of what Alan is saying. These are all chicken pluckers. So I'm going to start in a corner box, and it's just going to go corner box, right hand box, corner. So if I look at my corner box, okay,
Left hand quadrant.
Okay.
Left hand quadrant straight away. Left hand quadrant.
So this should take me to a right hand box. There's my pass-through trade by. That's a right-hand lady box in sequence, and it's still in that left-hand quadrant. That's my corner box. Oh, sorry, right and left are needed.
Yep.
There's my corner. There's my corner box. That's my original corner box. This should take me into a right-hand lady box. Now, that's still a chicken plucker, but what it's done is flip-flop the square. Because you notice that right-hand lady box, I've now inverted, and I moved them over. I've still got my paired couple on the inside, and I haven't inverted it. I've got my paired couple still on the inside, but the number one man has gone from the left-hand quadrant to the right-hand quadrant. But it's still a chicken plucker. It's now in the corner box grouping, but in the right-hand quadrant. It's still a chicken plucker. Okay, there's square through 3, trade by. I've now changed the quadrant again. Gone from right hand to left hand. I've moved them across. That's a very important, what he's saying is a very important thing to know. Again, that's another advanced calling technique. But sorry, it's not an advanced calling technique. It's more being aware of where the dancers are on the floor. If I look at right hand rotation modules, this is where it becomes really important. Square through puts me into the left hand quadrant. Okay. If I look at a right hand, if I go from here, my box should be here next, it should be here next, it should be here next, thinking logically. What you have to be aware of, what do these modules actually do? Okay, I've now changed it to a partner box. Oh, wait a minute. I'm not in the partner door. I'm in the partner door entering the room, but my orientation and my occupation of the floor is still that left-hand quadrant. When I do ones like this one, okay, this is a left-hand rotation, and I did this intentionally. And this is what Alan's saying. If I did a left-hand rotation, you notice how when I did a right-hand rotation, I kept that position. If I do a left-hand rotation, some modules change my occupation on the floor. I'm now in the partner quadrant or the bottom quadrant.
Home quadrant, yeah.
Okay. If you understand that, what he's saying is if you do a module that does a left-hand rotation or a right-hand rotation, or if we change sequence the opposite directions, make a little note on your module that it rotates the quadrant that you end up in. That's ideally recognizing this is really good, because from here, oh, wait a minute, I can go pass through trade by, that's my chicken plucker, and that's going to take me to partner boxes on the opposite side, because I'm in opposite boxes here. And then I can do a get out from the other side. And if I do a get out from the other side with the number 1 man here, if my get out is to a right and left grand, where is it going to take me? Right to home. Or if I do an Alaman left and promenade, I've got a short promenade home. But if I call right and left grand and promenade here, I'm making the dancers promenade all the way around in a patter call, which I would only do if I'm a new caller and I need a break to get my head back together to really confirm to myself where the dancers are, or need to give the dancers time to fix a mistake that I made. So being aware of that is actually a very, very powerful tool as well. Again, that is a technique that comes with skill and experience over time. I cannot stress it enough. Again, the best system of calling is the one that works for you. Whether or not you learn boxes, whether or not you learn modules, whether or not you learn site calling, whether or not you learned modular calling with site resolution, isolated site, whatever works for you is the best system of calling for you to start with, that you understand to build from. The foundations are most important, especially for new callers and for mentoring new callers. If you're a caller in a position to teach a new caller, you want to mentor them with the best skills and knowledge that's available from you at the time that you are comfortable with. If, like Alan says, Alan's very comfortable working quadrants, and I wish to God I had a choreographic mind like he does, but I don't. If you understand the quadrants and you understand sequence, and you got a way of teaching that, encouraging that at the start, wow. You can move the dancers in and out of anywhere. You can sight call and recognize where dancers are and quickly change those sequences. And you can use all those get out techniques from this system, or all the get out resolution techniques or modular techniques. because it's all going to work for you. It doesn't matter where your sequence is. If you recognize it's in sequence or out of sequence, you can make that change like that and take any get out technique. If you wanted to only resolve out of corner boxes, you can get into any of those quadrants. Use this technique to rotate right or left. Just put them in sequence, rotate them right or left to where you want to go, and call a get out. And what's nice about it is you can be in any box and call a rotation right, a rotation left, or a rotation across once you fix sequence to get to that Alaman left. Doesn't matter where you are. You're either there or you're one module away from there if you understand sequence. That's a powerful tool, but that works really effective if that's the way you started learning. If it didn't, then you have to make yourself aware of it to make that a powerful tool. And that's how these skills develop. None of them are right, none of them are wrong. None of them are really better than others. What makes them good, what makes them powerful is what you do with them and how you're going to work with them. This session was mainly just to talk about a follow-up on boxes from Bob's presentation, and we want to do another follow-up with lines, which does the same kind of thing. And the same kind of issues are going to arise with lines because we work from partner lines, opposite lines, corner lines, or right-hand lady lines. But the techniques are exactly the same. Lines are a bit easier because this is where lead to the right and lead to the left actually come in, because you can do a swing through boys run. I've now changed the sequence of the boys from a lead to the right to a partner grouping in sequence. Bend the line, guess what? I'm in my partner lines. Wait a minute. Yeah. Had to think about that for a second. Yes, Ross.
Yeah, I guess through the years I've had lots of ups and downs and not really known where I'm going. I've probably got more focus this year. And what I've found easier is basically the isolated site and then moving one couple and knowing where that couple's going to be. So
Yep.
if I move my couple across with a chicken plucker, I guess in my background, I'm knowing whether I'm in sequence or out of sequence, and then knowing whether to move that couple back or move the other couple over. And I'm really concentrating on things now when I get a bit of time. I'll look at a move and really go through it and say, what does it do? Where does it go? What happens? And that really helps things, which will take a while.
You're
But
absolutely
I
correct.
learn by understanding. So if I understand what something is, I figure I've always have, and then I know how to fix it if something goes wrong. But there's so much to learn with this and so many different techniques. So I have been
Yep.
working with Daryl. He's been doing a lot of work with us and he's been really good.
Yep.
So
Daryl is absolutely great. Daryl works a lot with what's called the basic traffic pattern, which is the linear chicken
yes,
plucker across and back. These techniques work exceptionally well with what Daryl is talking about because they are linear, and it doesn't matter if it's right-hand box, opposite box, right-hand lady box, or corner box. The technique working across with the chicken plucker, and this is what Alan was saying, was absolutely correct. So if I do a get into whatever, is Taminations up on your screen?
yes,
Yes, Mel.
Okay. So if I do, let's just stay with the corner box for the moment. Okay. So if I stay with the corner box, what you're saying is if I do isolated site, I'm just going to look, I want the paired couple on the outside. So if I have the paired couple on the outside, I can do swing through, boys run, Ferris wheel, and centers pass through. Pass through. Okay. I've done it, whatever. I can do a left touch 1/4, scoot back, it's a lefty. Let's have the girls run. I don't have any module in my head. Pass the ocean. Ladies trade. Recycle. Okay, I've done some isolated site. I put my paired couple on the outside. From here, it doesn't matter if you use a sequence change chicken plucker, right and left through, pass through, trade by, or you use a keep sequence chicken plucker, because you're going to use the same chicken plucker to move back and forth. So let's just use the sequence change chicken plucker. Okay, that's the sequence change chicken plucker. If you have your module that you want to do, say spin the top as your module, I just use that because it's a quick and easy one. Okay, all I have to remember is, okay, I did a sequence change chicken plucker to go across. I've got to do a sequence change chicken plucker to come back. Helps if you spell square through. Helps if you spell square through correctly. And I'm back in my corner box. If I did the same thing with pass through, trade by, I'm doing exactly the same thing. I can do my isolated site. All I have to do is remember, put my paired couple in the middle, or if you prefer looking at these ones, or if you prefer looking at these ones, it doesn't matter. Whichever two dancers you choose, I do my isolated site to keep them back into that exact same footprint, and then I do my in-sequence chicken plucker to take them back. That is the power of this system. What Alan is saying, if I'm correct, it works exactly the same if I do heads lead right. Now I have one in, one out of sequence. I can do anything here, but I want to change the sequence. And the sequence that I need to change right here is, of course, the boys. So if I do swing through, okay, I have not changed the sequence of the girls, but I have changed the sequence of the boys. Boys run. And then I can do whatever I want here to put them into wheel and deal, right and left through. That's, I mean, that's really chintzy, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about. Now I can use this technique. I can use the rotate left, I can use the rotate right, I can rotate across. If you are aware of the fact that one was in sequence, one was out. If you're not, you can still use your chicken plucker techniques. Pass through, trade by. Okay. I can do my isolated site. I can do my module. I can do whatever I want there. And then I just use my chicken plucker that keeps that sequence that I'm in. Pass through, trade by. And now all I have to do is my whatever it is to change the boys sequence, which I believe we had a not great choreography, but I can't spell today.
Yeah.
Okay, so now if I look at it, I've got 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2. They're all in sequence, and I can use a partner line get out, or sorry, a partner box get out. Oh, I've changed sequence. I've change sequence. I've essentially done a right and left through. I've changed sequence, everybody's there, and I can do a bend the line to an Alaman left or whatever. I'm on the opposite side, promenade home. Any kind of that partner box in sequence get outs that you wanted. It's a very, very powerful tool. What Alan, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Alan, but what you're saying is if you are aware of this, you can fix this at any point.
I'm putting a bit more
to
structure.
use any of those techniques.
I'm putting a bit more structure than that, Mel. If you go back to lead right. And I'm sure somebody like Roz heads lead right.
I just hit the button one too many times.
This is probably a good way, and let's do a flutter wheel just for quickness, just so that we can. Yeah, the boys are out, so you've got a partner group. You're going to put them in sequence, normal couples. So the couples are normal, but we're facing our partner. We've got a choice of exiting here if we want to pass through to an Alaman left, or swing our partner and promenade or whatever. But if we step to a wave here, we're in sequence. And my real goal here is to rotate them around a bit.
I'm just adding these notes in so that if somebody watches the recording later.
Yeah. So if we were going to use this as a starting point, and we're going to go on, we're heading for another group. So if you understand the idea that any circulate's going to give you that other group. So if you step to a wave when you're in sequence like this, and let's talk about it. If you have the girl, don't do it yet. If we have the girls circulate, we suddenly have a corner group. But it's in the right-hand quadrant.
Okay.
If we have the boys circulate, we still have a corner group, but it's in the left-hand quadrant. So by understanding that, you've been able to go out to a partner group, set up a partner box, made a partner wave. We could do all sorts of zeros here if you wanted to. You can then have the boys or the girls circulate and know you've got a corner group. But you've got another little bit of information there, powerful information. If I have the boys circulate, then I've got them in the left-hand group where it's an Alaman left, come back and square your sets. So it's just adding a little bit of extra talent, if you like, along the way as you go. So, but if you hear everybody slide through from the wave, you've got a partner line.
Yep.
So you could work.
I'm just going to interrupt there for 1 second, Alan.
Yep.
I want to bring this back up. If you remember in Bob's presentation, he talked about this.
I didn't see this, so I'll
No, I understand that, but I'm just tying these in together. The importance of sequence is here. It doesn't really matter what direction you're facing or anything else. And when we work the circles, this is essentially exactly what Alan's talking about. So if I have the ladies move one direction, I change from partner to right-hand lady to opposite to corner. If I have the boys move, I just rotate it the other way from partner to opposite to corner, or to right-hand lady, partner to right-hand lady to opposite to corner. And then the girls, I go the opposite direction. Partner, corner, opposite right-hand lady. It works the same in a circle, or it works the same in the line if you're going to rotate the dancers either left or right. It makes no difference. So when we talk about this here, again, rotating the boys or rotating the girls is exactly the same thing. I'm only moving them one position because I'm not changing sequence. All I'm doing is changing who they're with. That's the exact same principle. So you had a slide through. There's my partner lines in sequence.
Now, if I was to do a partner module here, but don't do it, you could, right? Or now, all the callers need to know is, how do I go from my partner line back to my partner box, which keeps my sequence, and I can then move them around and do something else. So a right and left through, the quickest is the right and left through and slide through. And we're now back in our partner box. So we can do a quick transition across the square if we want to. And we'll be in the opposite lady box by just doing a pass-through trade by. So this is why I see this combining with what you were teaching today with a little bit more structure at the front end gives you much more logical choices without having to know a lot more other than how do I go from any group into an in-sequence partner box or in-sequence partner line or whatever it is that you're in each group. And obviously the two that are easiest to see for people who are site callers is your partner sequences and your corner sequences, because they're so much easier to recognize.
And just
and
to
so
add to that in a dimension, if you can recognize a partner sequence and you know how to get out of a partner box, you can do a chicken plucker. All you need is one get out from an opposite box. If you can recognize a corner grouping and you can get into a corner box, you can do a chicken plucker and get out from a right-hand lady box.
Exactly.
And it's just, if that's the technique you learn, what you're actually developing is you already know your get in, you already know how to recognize those two. You've got the dynamic of learning half of this system, and by learning half of this system, you already know the whole system because you have to recognize those other ones to get there. All you do is get into the other one. You already know how to do a chicken plucker to come across the other way.
Yeah, so if we were here, just step to the wave again, have the boys circulate. So we'll go to a corner group. And
I'm just doing this for a reason.
oh, okay, I didn't want to move, but anyway.
I just wanted to show this. Even if I do that, I'm still in a corner group.
Yep.
Okay. So all I'm doing is just moving what quadrant they're in.
So if you're in a corner group, Ben, you've gone back. Okay. Just slide through from where you are, and you're in a corner line. And then, of course, if what you really wanted was the module for the corner box, right and left through and slide through is going to give it back to you.
Yep.
Or if you wanted a corner wave, a right and left through and past the ocean.
And so on and so forth.
So let's step to the wave and let's demonstrate another little bit of power of this sort of. If I could just finish.
As I mentioned earlier, we have an Australian Callers Federation meeting at 11 o'clock.
Oh, my apology. Okay.
So we've got about 2 minutes to get into this.
We have.
So,
swing through.
yep.
Boys trade.
That was my sequence changer. That's my bringing it back to the in sequence. So I'm still in the corner grouping, but everybody's still in sequence.
We're in a wave where you probably get to here with a single circle to a wave or whatever, but touch to a wave and scoot back or whatever. The point I wanted to make is here, if you have the girls circulate, you've got, don't do it. Just let's talk about it. You've got a partner group again. Undo that. If you have the boys circulate, you've got your partner group again, and you're making the choice about which quadrant you want it in by just choosing whether you have the boys or girls circulate. So depending on your get outs that you're going to use following it, that might be useful to you. That was all I wanted to make, Mel.
Yep. Like I said, knowing that your corner grouping, if you know that just moving one forward changes your grouping from corner to partner, everybody moving half forward changes you from corner to partner. And because we are half sashayed instead of normal couples, which is what that ocean wave swing through boys trade does, takes me to a half sashayed couples. Pass through or extend to a right and left grand is a nice neat little get out from there.
I hope I didn't upset your presentation, Mel.
No, not at all. Like I said, you weren't here for Bob's initial presentation, were you?
No, I've been away in the
Okay,
hospital.
that's yeah. As I said, when we broke it down, using that circulate, moving left or right, that's covered in the circles, which is explained that a circle is a box, is a line, just facing different directions. And if you move the dancers left, if you move the girls left or you move the boys right, you're not changing sequence. All you're doing is changing the get out. And if you can recognize that in the line or in the circle, you begin to be able to recognize that in the boxes, because that is all about sequence. Alan's added just the dimension on when you have one in, one out, or both in, both out. If you can recognize that, you can easily fix that, and then all of these techniques apply to your dancers moving in and out of the boxes. All we wanted to focus on today was just moving in and out of the boxes and managing those boxes. But as he said, the techniques apply right across the board, regardless of what system of calling you use. With experience, you get to the advantage of being able to see this more and more and being able to do those little variations quicker, faster, and easier. If you have any questions on this, the the presentation and all my notes are going to be there on the website, the OC Callers website. If you have any questions about this, just like last time, I got about 8 emails asking me to go into more depth on the boxes. We'll do that. Sometime in the future, we're going to have a little bit of a deeper look at doing this thing with lines, even though Alan's already covered about 60% of that material in his presentation, or in his talk on that. And that is actually, in my opinion, a really, really good thing, because if you're aware of it, wow, it's a very, very powerful way. It just takes a slight change of mindset, being aware of sequence instead of being locked into the, this is a corner box, this is its opposite. Don't worry about right and left, or sorry, partner and opposite boxes. These are the two that you're going to change on, and if you want variety, change from head square through to side square through. We were locked into that mode for so long. This expands that mode, giving you a lot more flexibility as a caller with one get in, one get out, and a simple cross the street module. Gives you so much more material. Right, that's it for today. Sorry we don't have a lot of time for questions, but we do have another meeting to get to for us in Australia, so I will see you all later. Thanks again, John, for recording and sharing that. I think Mark is online, but I don't know if he was recording or not.
Thank you, Mel.
Yes.
Thank you. You said an ACF meeting. Is that just for the hierarchy? Or is that a general one?
I thought it was our general meeting.
General meeting.
Give me a second. I'm just going to open up the email.
I haven't heard about it, so I'm not sure about it.
No, I haven't heard about it either.
Hang on. Well, that's kind of weird because I asked the question is, give me a second. Mail. Oh, sorry, SARTA meeting.
Ah, there we go.
Okay.
My apologies.
Well, at least you know you're joining the right meeting now.
All right, so thanks everybody for coming in. And as I said, if you have any questions, by all means, just let me know, and we will try and get an answer back to you.
Thanks,
as
Mel,
I
and-
can see from
Thanks,
the
Mel.
discussion, and Alan, I would love to actually explore this concept, your approach of using this, but being more aware of sequence. I'd love to approach this a little bit further, just as another, because as you know, I like to, rather than just present a concept, I like to get into the details and simplify them down into the nitty gritty. So if you're up for it and want to do a presentation on even taking this a little further, I welcome it.
Thanks for the offer, Mel. I'm currently writing a paper, just as a general approach, right from tours right through. So I might finish that first and just.
Absolutely.
But I had read this Four Doors thing before. Glenn sent me a copy of the original paper, I think it was, and
Is that the one on Glenn's website?
yeah, I think it
Yeah,
might be.
that's a
And
simplified version of the original one.
yeah, and so I didn't have access to the original, but I just thought I'd tie it into a sort of a general paper that just discusses approach all around. So, and the thing is that we've got mighty fine callers who've developed stuff around groups and how effective it is, and the ability to see your groups just makes it so much. I think a much more modern approach, rather than saying to people, "I learn that square through gets you to a corner," and etc.
Yeah.
etc. And
Um,
they're then tied into an older system that maybe makes it harder then to sort of switch, as you
yeah,
say.
well,
What
this is why I say it requires a bit of setting what you know aside to look at
Yeah.
another system. Have a look at the original presentation from Bob, because it has a lot of that additional material in it. That's
Okay.
not really included, but it goes into the boxes and the lines and everything else. This is actually a system that Bob Elling developed following on what he was mentored in, going way back.
But certainly once you get to the idea of being able to go to a box or a line in sequence in any group, you've got it mastered, because you can swap groups.
Yeah,
Know
and
you're
it
in
opens up the flexibility and the variability on the floor for the
know you're in
dancers.
sequence, and etc. etc. And then modular callers can add their modules, their butte get outs from wherever they want to, and it just gives you that enormous flexibility. Then I think.
Okay, well, I'm going to apologize. I would believe me, this is a discussion I would
You've
love
got to
to carry
go.
on, but I really do have to go. I'm already 8 minutes late.
Thank you all.
But
Okay.
thanks
Thank you
all
very
everybody.
much, Mel and
If any
Alan.
of you are in Canberra next Wednesday, is it, Alan?
This Wednesday, coming Wednesday.
This
yeah.
coming Wednesday. If any of you are in Canberra this coming Wednesday, pop into Alan for his 44th birthday dance.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Happy birthday.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ross.
It's not, yeah. Alan turns 44.
I
this
know
year.
it's the club.
Mind you, Mel, I'd love to be 44 again.
I wouldn't. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
guys. Cheers, Alan. Cheers,
Bye.
Mel. Guys.
Bye now.